Welcome back, Honors. All right, so we are now unfortunately recording this flip again. All right, now you won't hear this if this doesn't post, but for some reason, if this file is also corrupted, I'm going to freak out, and I'm not going to post one today, and we'll just kind of bounce back and figure it out, because if I'm having technical difficulties, I'm having technical difficulties, I'm having technical difficulties, if I'm having technical difficulties, right? So anyway, but let's get after it, all right? So we did a little like pre-assessment thing today, which we usually always do when we're starting a new topic. It just gives me the ability to try and figure out kind of what you know, right? And it's apparent that y'all know like a lot of little odds and ends about Egypt as a whole, right? It was very apparent when we started that y'all don't know doodly squat about Egypt where it's located, all right? But it happens, you know, it's whatever, all right? But anyway, watching some of y'all fumble over that live map was pretty impressive, all right? So, but let's get into it, all right? So this flip is all focused on like looking at, let's make sure we're recording, because I have literally talked to a computer before that was not recording, all right? So what we're doing today, as the flip title says, is we are looking at ancient Egypt through like a crazy, crazy, crazy wide lens, all right? And what I mean by that is we're looking at like an overview of ancient Egypt. We're looking at like what they are culturally, all together, simple stuff, things like that, okay? So, but let's go ahead and get after it, shall we? Now, anyway, oh, also don't forget, you're gonna have a map quiz on your respective green and/or white day, okay? And it's very, very easy to figure out, okay? I'll show you this up today in class. Excuse me. Now, that right there is the magical land of which Egypt is located, right? No, it's not Europe, as like some of you randomly probably thought for like a hot second, or as like some of my other classes thought Egypt was located before we ever got started. Now, actually, Egypt, located in northern Africa, right? On the coast of the Mediterranean Sea. Hot and arid climate, but ironically enough, not everywhere, all right? When we think of Egypt, we immediately think a couple things. Boom, desert, death, no water. Not actually true, all right? When we looked at Egypt on that map today, right? Lush, green, beautiful, gorgeous, easy to grow stuff. Very good thing to keep in mind, all right? Now, however, the average temperature, which you need to write next to this, ranges wildly from different parts of Egypt, right? So if you're on the coast near like modern day Alexandria or Cairo, the climate's kind of like a Mediterranean climate, right? Very hot summers, much more dry though. I would say it's kind of close to like what a Louisiana like climate is, okay? Stays pretty warm, very rarely freezes ever, all right? So that's like your main cities though, your Cairo, your Alexandria. Now, if we were to go about 100 miles down south, and then like about 70 miles west or east, we're gonna be ended up in the desert, right? Now, in the desert areas outside of Egypt, now you're talking about things that are wildly different, right? Now you're talking about areas that are averaging temperatures of, oh, I don't know, 114 degrees during the summertime, right? So, and then plummeting down to like the low 50s at night, right? So it's very, very, very different. It fluctuates all over the place. But the lifeblood, the source, the everything for the Egyptians is the Nile, right? The Nile River is what creates this habitable biome that the Egyptians could actually settle near, next to, and profit off of, right? Profit in the sense of growing a civilization, growing art, growing culture, growing all these amazing things, right? So that is their key to survival, all right? And it actually is wildly different about how they just view the Nile differently, right? So we talked about in class when we did a little pre-assessment with the warm-up stuff, we were talking about like, all right, so what are some other rivers, major rivers you know? I knew I was going to hear Mississippi first. All right, so, but ironically enough, there was a Mississippian culture, but it was kind of eradicated by smallpox when the Europeans came over in the late 1490s, early 1500s. All right, so by the time that Hernán de Soto actually even got there, all that was left was like mounded villages and abandoned things because smallpox had eradicated them. But when we looked at the different river valley civilizations, like the Tigris and Euphrates river valleys are very important, but catastrophic flooding could knock out their entire crop yield and or their city at any given moment, right? It is very, very hard to regulate. They tried their best to create calendars to really, really understand the fluctuations of their rivers, but it wasn't as easy. Whereas Egyptians were not like the Mesopotamians. The Mesopotamians feared their river, thought that it was there and that if it wasn't appeased, it would destroy them, right? The Egyptians did not look at it that way. They praised the Nile. They saw it as the life source. Like, look at that. Look at that beautiful green, right? Look at the delta area right here. Alexandria located right here. Cairo, Egypt located around there. All right, so absolutely different because the Nile is their key to survival, right? Amidst this desert is this oasis, right, of the Nile. The ancient Egyptians depended on the Nile. So much so that they actually timed it up specifically that every September, all right, the Nile is going to flood. All right, now some of you are like, did they even call it September? Well, okay, let's calm down a little bit, all right, where I'm trying to give you some context here, Ellie. All right, so now really, really quick, the Nile is going to flood, okay? It's going to flood every September, and every November, the water is going to retreat, right? Which is absolutely amazing in terms of timing and regulating your crop yields, right? So when the waters would retreat, the key is what is left behind, all right? Silt, this stuff, this gunk from the bottom of the river, right? It's tiny bits of rock and dirt that are left behind by the flood. It's going to re-energize the soil, right? Now, some of you right now, like Ann, for example, are like, why is the bottom of the river stuff so good for the dirt and whatnot? Well, Ann, let me tell you, all right? So you have to understand that a river is basically like one of the Earth's recycling systems, right? It's a way that the Earth brings in dead, decomposing material and then flushes it out into the ocean where it can then further be disposed of, right? And then the water cycle starts all over again, it is replenished, and then everything keeps going, right? Well, the thing about it is dead, decomposing, nitrogen-rich materials fall to the bottom of the river because they're heavier, right? So when the floods would come every September, what happens when the flood comes through? It churns all that up, right? The flood comes pounding through, and it actually mixes up this dirt into the water, and then when it actually floods up the banks, it then settles back where they're going to farm, and then it comes back, and then the Egyptians would just go plant along the banks of the Nile River, right? An amazingly genius system because this silt is wildly, wildly important. This is kind of what it looks like in a modern-day sense. That is not what it looks like. This is what nutrient-stripped dirt looks like, right? This right here is something you see in the South a lot, right? Red clay. Really, really nasty red clay. You see all how nothing really viable is growing here. A lot of shrub plants, a lot of weeds and things like that. That's because all this dirt has been stripped of its nutrients. That is what clay looks like. This, on the other hand, is nutrient-rich silt. Wildly different things, right? So this you do not need to write down, but it's just a good example. If you want to write down anything that has to do with this slide, Allie, you need to write down the Egyptians farmed with absolute ease. All right, so let's fast forward really quick. Fast forward past probably about 2,000 years. Fast forward about 2,000 years. And there's this man named Herodotus, right? Greece is bustling. It's figuring its life out. It's just won some wars against the Persians, and it's doing a good job, right? Well, there's this man named Herodotus, right? And he becomes the very, very first Western historian, right? The very first Western historian was this man by the name of Herodotus. He was a Greek man, and he began to travel all over the world, right? Travel all over the world and discover and understand the different cultures that existed, and then began to record them, which is a massively important thing, right? Because there are three very important things that make up great countries, and we'll get there here in a second, but we just need to remember them. We'll wait until we get there. Now, he said that Egypt, to which Greeks go in their ships, is an acquired country, the gift of the Nile, right? Basically, he's saying that Egypt, right, is a country that is a gift from its natural habitat, right? And is an acquired country because by this point, the Greeks actually had taken over Egypt, right, under Alexander the Great. Now, at present, he says, at present, it must be confessed they obtained the fruits of the field with less trouble than any other people in the world, the rest of the Egyptians included. What he's trying to explain is that Egyptian farming is wildly simple. If you took this seed and just stuck it in the dirt around November, it's going to grow something as long as the seed is climatologically ready to grow in that environment, right? Very, very easy to farm in ancient Egypt. Absolutely wildly easy, right? Then, as time goes on, their government is going to begin to create it around this collective agriculture, right? Because here's the thing. There are three things that make great, powerful, culturally driven countries, right? They are collective agriculture, writing systems, and a centralized government, all right? So there's a reason why you know more about ancient Egypt than you do about Mesopotamia, right? And a lot of it has to do with their centralized government, all right? So early on, Egypt is going to be divided into two simple kingdoms, right? An upper and a lower kingdom. But then along comes the OG pharaoh, the greatest of them all, I think anyways, Menes, M-E-N-E-S, right? We'll talk about the way he died later on, which is hilarious. But anyway, so he's going to unite these two kingdoms in 3100 BC, creating one huge political unit, one autonomous thing known as Egypt, right? So, and you can't see this, but what the key here is it created a centralized government. Now, what a centralized government is, jot this down in your own words, is a country that is ruled and, what's a good way to put this? A country that is ruled and officiated from one location, right? The United States of America is a great example of a centralized government, right? Because we have one national capital of which all federal law emanates, okay? And even our states, state to state, have a centralized government. We have a capital city of which all of our laws emanate, right? Now, in the grand scheme of things, you're like, wait a minute, if we have state capitals and a national capital, are we really that centralized? We are actually, because federal law trumps state law every time, all right? So pretty much no matter what, except for nullification laws, but that's wildly different. That's an entire thing that you'll get into with Mr. Wooderson at one point, discussing like what nullification means when you get to AP Gov, because you are wicked geniuses. Now, so speaking of Menes, one amazing symbol that actually came around was the crown of the pharaohs to try and show the unification of these two kingdoms. So the upper kingdom actually wore a hat that looked, or a crown that looked like this, right? It looks like a bowling pin almost. And then the lower kingdom actually wore this one, a crown that looks literally like a lizard is just like hiding in here going blah. Like, so what Menes did when he actually united the two of them together, he created one unified crown as a unified symbol of the two places together. Now, this is not Egypt. This is Mesopotamia. And like I said earlier, as you can see, a mishmash of different city-states, right? We got Babylon up here. The Assyrians are all the way out there. The Akkadians are somewhere around here. Ur is right there. Sumeria is around here. So as you can tell, we don't know as much about ancient Mesopotamia as much as we do about Egypt because they don't have a unified culture, right? Each city-state had their own gods. Each city-state had their own like customs. Each city-state had their own resources in Mesopotamia. Whereas in wildly different sorts, Egypt was one unified culture under a centralized government. Speaking of that centralized government, what they used to rule over the entire thing was called dynastic rule, all right? So following the unification of the kingdoms, Egypt adopted something known as dynastic rule, or rule by a family, or a ruling family, right? So a dynasty, in a sense, would be like, for example, if I was the second Caleb to rule over the house of Terry at the country of Archbishop Chappelle, I would be Caleb II, you know, or Mr. Terry II, or whatever, all right? So, but, well, usually you go by your first name in these dynastic situations. We won't get into that right now, but it's selective houses, right? So when a father would die, rule would pass on to his son, and then it would follow on to that next son, and like a lot of other stuff. Now, is it that simple? Of course not, but the crazy amazing thing about Egypt is actually also that within these dynastic systems, women were also allowed to rule. Something you need to jot down when it comes to this little dynastic ruling system. Women had a higher status within ancient Egypt, right? They could be leaders, queens, pharaohs in their own right. Cleopatra was the last ruler of like the ancient Egyptian period before the fall of the Greeks and the eventual being taken over by the Romans. But that's neither here nor there. So this is going to differ, though, majorly from Mesopotamia because people like Nebuchadnezzar and Hammurabi and Sargon the Great and all these other individuals were warlords. They had organized militaries and taken the Fertile Crescent over, right? Whereas these dynastic rulers would actually, their family lines would just kind of change over time, right? And then last but not least, the big thing about them that is a unified understanding of Egypt is their religion and their mythology, right? So early on, first and foremost, you need to jot this down, they're polytheistic, right? They have a system of gods and goddesses, okay? So early on, they believe that there are two supreme gods and goddesses. Amun, which is supposed to be the wise king of the sky, right? The open blue sky. And then Ra, the justified taker of life and the god of sun, right? Or of the sun. Now, ironically enough, geographically, this would make complete sense when you think about it, considering the fact that the sun is kind of the taker of life if you don't have sustenance of which to keep yourself alive, right? And then the wise god of the sky because, you know, the giant open area that is ancient Egypt that doesn't have a lot of surrounding geographic things that actually hide the horizon lines, right? So then as time goes on, they begin to expand a little bit. Begin to add minor gods to their system. Begin to add myths to their system, right? Horus, for example, is the falcon god of the hunt and war. He is the messenger of Ra. He bestowed the ability to rule upon pharaohs. This is him right here. Notice he's wearing the crown, right? The unified Egyptian crown, and he is bestowing the ability to rule upon the pharaoh here, right? So the amazing system about it, though, is that actually as it becomes more intense later on, priests are actually going to combine the two gods together, right? They're going to create what is known as Amun-Ra, right? So Amun-Ra is actually supposed to be the formless, great god of Egypt that is believed to embody himself at anything at any time, right? So very, very interesting in the form of the Jewish God, right? So in the forms of the early monotheistic religions, this concept of a formless figure, right? And everything, an omnipresent, omnipotent, omniscient type of deity or God, right? So he is formless and believed to embody himself in anything at any time. Now, one of the ways that he would often come back is he would actually come back as a ram. Now, funny enough, in the crossover stories, what is Abraham given? A ram by God when he's not supposed to sacrifice his son, right? So represented, of course, also by the all-seeing eye. That is the symbol of Ra. And then also, whenever they're supposed to be Ra as embodying a god of himself, he would actually appear as a sun above that god's head, right? So what we're going to get into tomorrow is we're going to keep taking this religion and mythology stuff a little bit further, and we're going to talk about like their judgment story, how it relates to how they would embalm bodies and stuff. And then after that, we're going to start getting into the nitty-gritty of ancient Egypt, going one by one, like through their time periods, and discuss their history in total. All right, so but that's it. That's where we're going to stop for today. Can't wait to see you guys tomorrow. Have a great one.